Dr. Karungu, very good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Good evening to you.
Now, just taking stock and reflecting on last year's conference, I mean, how far have you gone insofar as making sure that the recommendations and the suggestions that were made in last year's conference are being implemented for the development of the continent?
I think there is an understanding among the leaders, among the investors, that the opportunities in Africa are not only massive, they are real. Except the work of the governments across the continent is to create what we call a conducive environment or a friendly environment for investment to thrive. Having said that, we are seeing a lot of changes. In actual fact, if you come through, you see that the African free trade treaty that we are working on is emanating from the need of what we call global environmental investment atmosphere to which all African countries will benefit. If you look at it, if you look at Europe, European Union, if you look at America, if you look at even Asia, the intra-regional trade ranges from almost 80% in Europe, 50-60% in America, about close to 70% in Asia, and barely 15% in Africa. And what that means is that we pay dearly to bring goods from all over the world rather than to have what we call intra-trade among ourselves.
Now, this is the second shot of the Africa Investment Forum. Just how significant is this kind of platform for the African economy?
I think there is a feel of what they call where is the future heading to. We have close to 670 million people with the fastest growing what we call youth. We have a huge proportion of youth. That's a very dynamic. Number two, there is a change in what we call middle income bracket across the world. But in Africa, it's even more in terms of the base we are starting from. In other words, it is incumbent. It is almost obvious that in the next 20 years, all else equal, the African continent will be able to be a key driver of global consumption, and that's what we have seen happening in China the last 15 years, and that's the way to drive the economy, and Africa will be a place to look and watch. You can't be left behind.
Indeed, Dr. Karungu. Now, the African Development Bank says that the continent's general economic performance continues to improve, with the GDP, reaching an estimated 3.5% last year and a projected 4% this year. But then this kind of growth does not translate to addressing the persistent fiscal and current account deficit and unsustainable debt. Where is the gap there?
Well, that's a very good point. You see, economic growth in its own does not necessarily mean development. Meaning, for far too long, we looked at economic growth as the measurement of what we need to have, rather than to say, if you grow the economy and you are not developing your people, you'll always be having very few people benefiting from that growth, but still having massive social demands that you are going to attend. And to attend to this social demand, you have to borrow immensely. Then you keep on borrowing, and therefore to surface this debt becomes almost impossible. What we need to see, and we hope we will see going forward, is whereby any economic growth translates to massive development of the people rather than what we have seen in yesteryears.
Yeah, but then juxtaposing those two narratives, economic growth and development, how do we ensure that it is in line? I mean, economic growth is in line with the development of the continent.
Look, it is that's what we anticipate. That's what we are trying to do. If you look at what has happened in China over the years, we saw that in the last 25 years, they did two things that were very important. They set the goals to bring into bear what we call middle class by 300-400 million people. If you have a big consumption base, you're going to develop the economy internally, and even from outside, you'll be able to survive, assuming they don't come on board. What do we need to do in Africa? And this is where our politicians need to understand. It's no longer about saying we need to be able to do that. It's too late. We have so many people in dire strain. We can't afford to have a country whereby literally 65% of our people barely make it with $1 a day. when we understand that, the question we need to do. I have been saying, and this is stated by everybody else, if you look inward in Africa, there is nothing we don't have. What do we lack? We've been lacking A, political will, or an environment in which the thrust of the economy is to help the majority. It was for the privileged few. That's number one. Number two, we have had so many dialogue after dialogue, so many development plan after development plan, but because it's not geared to address the core challenge we face of creating employment, making sure we reach the people that we need, making sure corruption is indeed zero. Look, this is on record that it has been proven by some economists, by the IMF, and I doubt if I'm going to use the quote, that over the last 50 years, it is more than likely the potential of African GDP has been lost by a rate of probably 53–60%, meaning corruption has literally taken away everything that we could have had. But also, remember, we always negotiate from a weak point. We negotiate by extracting all our resources and shipping them to Europe, and then we import from at a very high price. Yeah. Those are the issues we need to address. Clean corruption to the letter. Hold everybody accountable. Make sure that it is your interest, in my interest, as an economist or as a broadcaster, to make sure that even if I meet my helper at home, they have enough to educate their children. They have enough to eat well. It's no longer about who looks like what, who drives what. It's a question of how many people do we carry from this, what we call poverty trap.
Now, in the context of the African continent's free trade area goals of establishing a single market for all the 54 African countries on various goods and services, so don't you think that the elimination of bilateral tariffs will hurt the intra-African trade?
Not necessarily. I'll tell you why. The cost to which there is always a cost, what we call cost-benefit analysis. One of which, yes, there will be hurting in some space and there will be roofing, but in totality, if you let the free flow of goods, in economic we argue that you're gonna let those people who are advantaged in doing certain things specialize in what they do best, because the market will be bigger than what they are used to. And it is, instead of trying to do everything else. In other words, those people are doing tea, those people who are doing coffee, those people who are doing, they'll be able to see the market opening in a shorter distance. Remember, we have already have the market, but we are saying it will be now faster to do business between Zimbabwe and South Africa without thinking of this 1 day or 5 days borderline of trying to figure out what is in the truck. Now it will be, no, you can imagine a continent without borders in the manner we know them, because that's basically what we are trying to say. And I could be able to buy the same good cheaper in this country as I'll buy it elsewhere else. There will be no increase in prices because of what we call trade barrier, so to speak. All I'm asking is, let's have a huge, bigger market for each one of us, but let also those countries that are more advantaged to be responsible of making sure that those countries with less opportunity will. In economics we say, let's use, it's a simple analysis of saying the comparative advantage, those who are advantaged in certain way will be able to give us the volume, a lot of what we have, and they'll be able to access that which they buy nearby at a cheaper price.
So in short, you're also advocating for the elimination of borders to, to boost or augment intra-Africa trade?
I would agree with you. You know, when you look at it, we are a continent with 54 countries. I mean, these boundaries were set with some, in my view, with a mindset by somebody. If you look at it, somebody decided to walk from Cape Town to where the north of Zimbabwe and decided there should be another country. Somebody, one day, I'm not talking of, if you ask what led to the boundaries we have, it was somebody's interest. Those interests have costed us a lot. Do we really have them? I don't know. Do we need them? I don't think we do as an economist. The cost to which we see them is a bit too much. Listen, South Africa in particular has anything you can imagine. What don't we have? We don't have the skills. Now I admit, we don't have enough skills to propel this economy to be one of the biggest in the world. We need to have skills. Now, to have skills, what do we mean? We need to be able to say, okay, if hypothetical, if you can be able to bring X, somebody, let's say from Malawi, and he is capable to generate a mathematician that can be able to duplicate 20 mathematicians, you can imagine what we are trying to say. Those are some of the things we need to put into pragmatism. Listen, I say and I repeat, it is illusional to assume Europe will develop Africa. It will be illusional to think somebody who is coming because he's an expert in Harvard will change the continent. It's in our hearts, it's among ourselves to be able to say, I'll be accountable for what I do for others, not necessarily by just going to church, but by being clear that we work hard, we are committed, we pay taxes, we are not corruptible, and we are looking forward for the future of our children, which is the common goal of you and I.
You know, Dr. Karungu, just yesterday I was in conversation with Ms. Swazi Shabalala, who is the Vice President for Finance at the African Development Bank, and she said that the bank henceforth will now be focusing on clean energy products, and they'll be turning their backs on, the traditional, natural resources. And I asked in the context of the discovery of, for instance, I mean, there's a potential boom of gas in Mozambique. So would that hurt that country's particular economy?
Well, look, in the end, we need to balance what we call environmental imperatives, which is we cannot afford to cost our children their future by what we are doing today. We understand that. But what we do know is that if we get, and that's what we said before, if we can be able to get natural gas, we can be able to create easy gas cooking system in many homes across the Southern Africa. Gas cooking does not necessarily mean you are going to be able to have less energy, because we are saying let's have a substitute that is effective, that is less costly. Of course, we are saying if you burn it and it heats, it destroys the environment or the atmosphere, that's a different ball game. But of course, Africa also needs to be told that, look, we may be able to balance this, but we have been behind in lieu of what others have achieved using the cheap resources. Again, it's a balance of give and take. Now,
what then should happen to some of the natural resources, for instance, coal, which most financiers are now turning their backs on?
I think that is a challenge we need to face, and people are arguing, there are two arguments across the board, that the United States even today has been the polluter of the world. That's where it got where it is. Europe, the same. Now they are saying, let's change the game, let's go what we call environmental friendly. I don't have a problem with that. But in Africa, we need to understand that the alternative we have, if we do have it, and is cheaper, it will be offsetting the environmental damage, as also we access resources cheaper. So I don't understand. There will be always a compromise. Remember what I said? There will be a cost benefit. There will be some losers and some gains. Who are in totality, the majority gainers? The majority of people to gain will be the society, not only today, but in the future. We have to always question economics. When we think about economics, we think what we call short, medium, and long term. If we draw too much on the short term and we lose the goal on the long term, we're going to be able to have our children in the years to come.
Dr. Karungu, we thank you so much for your insights and for your time.
Most welcome.
Well, that was economist Dr. Peter Karungu. This is The Globe on SABC News. Thanks for watching.